So I'll introduce you three now, and then we'll get to the question. Okay, so first, Elvira is from Mexico, and she teaches with the Monterey Institute Technology and Higher Ed. Next, we have Yersham David of GEM Guatemala, and he teaches at the University of Francisco Medellin. And next, finally, is Peter Dusty of GEM Canada, and he works at the Center of Innovation Studies there in Canada. So next we'll move on to the questions here. And what I'm going to do is just ask these to you in a row, starting with Elvira, then Peter, then David. And if you can, respond in, maybe a minute or two answer, that would be great. So I'll start with you, Elvira. What is your current vendor, and how long have you been with them? And how would you describe your current relationship?
Okay, hi, good morning, everybody. Well, our current vendor is Verumen, that's the company. We have been with them since 2016, okay? But this is the second vendor we have had. The first one was from 2001 to 2016. So that was 16 years with that first vendor. We only end working with them because the manager, the principal manager, he just retired and closed the company, basically. So there was a pretty long relationship, but now the new vendor we have, it's a very well-established firm. At GEM, we have been working with them for a few years, but they're one of the most important vendors for doing surveys with Tecnológico de Monterrey. So we really know them for many, many years. So there is a close relationship with the university and the vendor. And we've been working with them like 3 years with them, but it's a good relationship. Even when, because of administrative burdens, we're not able to pay on time sometimes, not so quickly. So they understand this situation. So it's a pretty good relationship, I would say. We trust each other.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're benefiting from that relationship with your institution because they understand sort of the difficulties of securing funding every year at the same time.
Yes, especially because we have one national funding, and then because we have many regions, and each region it's managing their own budget, so we don't pay like everything on time. I mean, not at the same time. We have the security of the national budget, and then we have like 6, 7 teams every year, and it's different, and they need to carry a different process for each team. Like sometimes like funding by government, so the governments usually take longer to pay. So they understand, and they know that our relationship goes more than just GEM.
So they see like that benefit of if they keep you happy, then you can give them business in other areas, on other projects.
Yes, they know that, yes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. Okay. David, I think you're, let's see. David, if you could unmute, okay. If you could answer that same question, who is your current vendor and how long have you been with them? And how would you describe your current relationship with that vendor?
Yes, we have been part of the GEM since 2009, and our vendor, his name is Canti, and it's a consulting company, and they have been our vendors since the first time that we joined GEM, and we were able to develop a close relationship because we had a previous experience outside GEM. We needed to collect data and from other experience. Just give me one.
think David is having mic issues. No worries.
Yes,
Okay.
I just having problems with a lot of noise outside my house, so
Yeah,
sorry about that.
no worries.
I was saying that for us it was like a reputational issue that lead us to hire Canty as our vendor because we had a previous um, research outside the university. We needed to collect data and run some interviews, and we were able to see that the person who is on charge of Canty um, really knows how to run a survey, a fieldwork experience, especially in Guatemala, because
Mm,
the main issue gathering data in Guatemala is knowing what kind of people to hire to collect data, how to ask for permissions to the
mm,
mayors and the different local governments to collect data. So for us, it was like more like a previous experience and also knowing other jobs that they had done collecting data. And after that, we check the budget. But for us, it was the main issue was having knowledge on how to collect data and how to hire the right people to make the interviews.
mm. Okay, so did you have a vendor before working with Candy, or was this your first one when you started with Gem?
No, he's the only one that we have had.
Okay, yeah. And so the most important thing for you was knowing that that vendor understood some of the nuances of working in Guatemala and, you know, some of the difficulties you have in collecting data given the country conditions.
Yes, and also because we had a previous work experience with this company,
Hmm.
so we were able to see the quality of the job, and also we had the opportunity to closely know the person who is in charge. So we trust on him, and we trust that he's going to follow up all the processes that we agree, and that he's going to implement the methodology step by step as we decide and as we need to um, in order to comply with all the requirements from the GEM.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for that. So now moving on to Peter, if you could describe your relationship with your vendor and who that is.
Yes, same as Elvira, we've had two vendors. The
Mhm.
first one, what we got by, turns out that the US GEM team used the same vendor we got a recommendation from the US GEM team to use this firm in Ottawa that was eventually bought by Nielsen. And we found that they were very, very professional. The project manager from that firm moved to another firm, and we moved with him.
Mm.
So we found that the relationship with the project manager was the most important thing for us, and he's been very good. And we've worked with him for 6 or 7 years now with two different companies.
Mm.
What we're really looking for in the vendor is somebody who can cover the whole country, somebody who's got a sort of a professional setup with their own call center, and they can interview in 2 languages because we need to do it in English and in French. And of course, cost. And
Right.
that was one of the other reasons we moved from our first vendor, because the price seemed to be going up, and with the second vendor, it was a lot lower.
Yeah.
So we are very happy indeed with our vendor. They do a lot of extra things for us. We've just encountered for the very first time We want them to do a little bit of extra waiting work for us.
Mm,
And in the past, they've always done that for free.
mm.
But this time they are suggesting they may have to charge us because we have a very large, we had over 10,000 surveys last year. So
Wow.
it's a lot more work than we have usually done.
Yeah. And so the project manager who you moved with to the new firm, what's the new firm you work with?
It's called Elemental Data Collection. It's a private Canadian firm.
Okay. And so you'd worked with this project manager for, you said, several years before they moved on to Elemental.
Yes.
And okay, so that was the kind of the primary motivation. Just you really trusted this one individual who
we really trusted the individual. Plus, the cost was lower.
Well, that's always good too. All right. Well, I appreciate that. So we'll move on to the next question here, and I'll bring it back to Elvira. So we touched a little bit on this for what you looked in a vendor, but in terms of priorities, was it the reputation or the cost, and maybe if you could talk a little bit about just generally, if you were looking for a vendor, what would you be looking for now?
Okay. Well, when we need to start looking for a new vendor, which was like 4 years ago, we had some concerns about the quality of the, well, not the quality, but the results, because we have been having changes, big changes in TEA. So we look for reputation at first. We know the cost is high. I think maybe Mexico has one of the more expensive surveys because we are still face to face. But reputation and this previous relationship with this vendor, with Tec de Monterrey, was one of the main issues. We know the cost is very important. We cannot just afford any cost. But for example, in the last 4 years, there have been no increases in the cost with this vendor. Okay, so that's a good thing for us. And yes, I mean, basically, we can, if we have like a very good company working with us, we can know, we can assure quality, and that's, I mean, we're not like losing everything just going for cheap things, then later cost more. So we know it's a costly survey, but we are prioritizing reputation with us and the long-term relationship previous with tech.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like the ideal situation, that you don't have that kind of sudden increase in costs there. And Yersham, David, if you could talk a little bit about what you were looking for in your vendor, the top priority. You mentioned before that it was that kind of understanding of the Guatemalan landscape. Was cost a big concern as well, and maybe how did you manage that?
Okay. We were looking for a long-term relationship. I think that was helpful for us and also for our vendor, because we knew since the beginning that our GEM project was a long-term project. So when we started looking for our vendor, we were really clear about that we wanted to have a long-term relationship, and that the cost of the gathering the data, it could be high, but I think that saying in advance that we want to have a long-term relationship helped us to develop first a more, I don't know how to say it, honest cost structure,
Yeah.
because the vendor knew that he needed to be a little bit sensible
Hmm.
about how to develop the cost structure, because we wanted a long-term relationship.
Right.
That was the first step that we took. And after we were looking for experience and the capability to implement 100% the GEM methodology, we needed to that our vendor will be really open, for example, during the training sessions, that we could be able to be part of the training sessions and explain the purpose of the study and collecting the data. And in the third place, I will say the cost. But for us, developing a long-term relationship, having the know that the vendor has the experience, and having the vendor open to really know what he was doing, and the training process was the main issues that we took in consideration. And at the end, we could say the cost. But the cost, we knew in advance that it was going to be high, because we need to do 100% face-to-face interviews. So since the beginning, we knew that it was going to be a costly project.
Yeah. But because of that long-term relationship, did you sign a contract or have a kind of some type of formal commitment that maybe you were able to work with the cost a bit because of that longer term commitment, that predictability?
We didn't sign like a formal contract,
Hmm.
but what we do is to say we're going to run during 5 years this project,
Hmm.
so give us a fixed cost in advance.
Oh,
So
okay.
the same price that we got the first year was the same price that we got at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And because we have like some flexibility in the budget, something that help us to have that kind of treatment um, was to give money in advance. For example, we execute the project in June,
Hmm.
but at the end, for example, in December, we give in advance 50% of the cost of the project,
Mm.
in order to help the vendor to hire people in advance, and do not put a lot of working capital on the project. So
Yeah.
by doing that, and for us it wasn't difficult, because it was about just adjusting the budget. But I think that we just had like a verbal agreement, and we tried to negotiate a fixed fee during certain periods of time.
Mm. Well, that's a really smart way to go about it, and I think that kind of long-term commitment is something I uh, want to ask. I want to return to Elvira real quickly and talk about that. Um, Elvira, can you maybe talk about if you have a long-term kind of understanding or relationship with your vendor? And another thing that David brought up that I think is interesting is that GEM Guatemala got to participate in the training of the vendor, and were you able to participate in the training or have input on that?
I think this long-term relationship is especially important because the survey is not, it's not an easy survey. It's not just asking people if they prefer some president or not, or candidate. It's important to work with them so they can, as David said, to understand the survey, understand what we're doing. So it's I think that's one of the main reasons. I mean, always long-term relationships, usually
Yeah.
they're better on. But I think this is especially important to so the vendor can understand we're looking for. The survey has a lot of skip logics issues, and it's complicated. So it's they having this previous experience every year. That's good for them because all the people actually doing the survey in the field, because this is a face-to-face survey, they do have the experience and they know how to manage this. So also training, it's really, really important for the vendor and for us.
Yeah, and were you or members of your team involved in the training at all?
We work with one person from the vendor, and we have, especially in the first year, a very long meeting explaining every question of the questionnaire and then showing them actually the global reports and the national reports, so they understand the importance of having a perfect run survey, because later on I will comment on one problem we had at the beginning of the job cycles in Mexico.
Okay.
So it's important. We do have these meetings and explain the survey.
Great, thanks for that. And we'll definitely return to the problems on the next question. And Peter, I'll ask you now on those points, do you have a long-term relationship with your vendor, either formal or informal? And how involved was your team in the training and working with all the idiosyncrasies of the survey, of which there are many, of course?
Well, we were very fortunate. The first vendor we worked with had previously worked with the GEM US team, so they knew the ropes about doing GEM surveys. And the project manager we were working with was very knowledgeable. One of the things that we value most in that relationship is the responsiveness. We're 3,500 kilometers from where our vendor has his business. So all of our communications are by email and occasionally by telephone. And what we find is we have a lot of oddball things, a lot of troubleshooting things, and a lot of slightly different. For example, last year, we did the entrepreneurial ecosystem module in three areas. That required a lot of extra work with the vendor. And we found that they're really very good in terms of responsiveness. Whenever we send an email, we usually get a reply within the same day or at least the following day. So I would think the responsiveness would be a very, very important parameter for when looking for a new vendor. Right.
And do you have in either in a contract or some type of agreement for a long-term relationship with this vendor?
No, it's a year-by-year contract.
And as far as the training, were you really involved in how that vendor, how Elemental put together how they were going to distribute the surveys? Were you involved in meetings or kind of guiding how they're going to collect the data because of the skip logic and some of the difficulties of the survey that were mentioned?
We were only involved to the extent that we sign a contract, and the contract lays out a lot of the parameters, like how many callbacks you make and that kind of thing. But beyond that, we have not been involved in training, no.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so moving on to the next question. If you've had any problems with your vendors, or maybe problems that came up in the collection process, and how was that managed? Elvira, if you could speak to that.
Okay, I remember it was like maybe 15 years ago. We had one problem with one question about the skip logic. At the end, it was a mistake in the questionnaire. It was one letter only, but that question was we skipped the question about the year of starting making payments. So we didn't ask this question So that means that that we were not able to distinguish if the firm was like nascent or new firm or established. It was like something like very difficult to us. So we were not able to estimate TEA. So that was a huge problem that we realized after we finished this and the survey was being processed, because at that moment we saw the TA was like too small, and then it was a huge problem. So it was not the full part of the TA. It was, I think maybe it was like the baby business or something, but we need to re-estimate. Okay, we were not able at that moment, that was like 15 years ago, at making again or revisiting households. So we need to make an estimation of TA using previous data. We work with GEM team and the vendor. We were not able to analyze data like in detail with the individual level, but we were able to have a TEA for that national and global report. That's like the biggest problem we had. But at the end, it was only one letter that was mistaken in the questionnaire. So that was like a huge learning. So we need to make the revision of the questionnaire and very well. Now we are using tablets, so we need to check the program. I mean, so we have like less probability of having this kind of mistakes. But that was very important for us, and the vendor didn't say like, okay, you didn't review the questionnaire or something, but we worked together, the vendor and GEM team, to solve this thing.
Yeah, so that skip logic is potentially very tricky. And but your new vendor, because you said this was 15 years ago, and your new vendor hasn't had any issues with that?
Yes, but the first year we worked with the new vendor, we had a very important decrease in the TEA rates.
Right.
So we were like very concerned with this, and they sent one statistician from the headquarters of this firm, which is a very big firm.
Right.
And we analyzed every process in the surveys, not only questionnaires, but also all the field work. We analyze all non-responses, all the files from our supervision, people asking. I mean, it was like they present to us a complete analysis of all the field work and all the results. And at the end, we were like, at the beginning, we were suspicious of what happened because of this change in vendor. But at the end, we were not able to say that it was something wrong, because they were very, very transparent, and they show everything they had, because they do have the files that document all the process of the field work. So that's why we continue working with them. That was the first year we changed. And we finally, we were happy with those results.
Yeah. So it's I guess it sounds like it was possible. It was just kind of an anomaly of a year, and they were able to present to you all of the methodology they used, and it was efficient.
Yes, actually, because next year's the TEA rates have been like steady around those new data. So we now understand that it was something that happened in that year, but now the data has been consistently in the pretty much same rates.
Yeah, so that's really important then for the vendors to document how they collect everything along the way, because otherwise you just have to take their word for it. So that's a valuable lesson, sounds like.
Yes, and now all responses, all the surveys are being recorded. So if we have one question, and I had one because last year, we have like some huge number of investment in one case. So so I called her and I said, okay, we need to check this data because the number is too high. And they checked the recording of the survey, and they say that the data was correct. So they actually do have all this quality assurance because they have all the field reports and
Mm.
records and everything.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Now, David, have you had any issues along those lines of data collection or any quality issues with your vendor, and how was that managed? David? Yep.
I think the main challenges. I think that the main challenges comes from outside unexpected events. For
Mm,
example, in 2011, in one community, um, the people around the community um, feel felt some kind of fear about the interviewers, so
mm.
they almost, I don't know how to say it, but almost kill the
Whoa.
interviewers because they speculate that they were collecting information to kidnap children. So
Mm,
they they try to find a refugee on the police station, and the unique way that they were able to get out of the community it was by burning all the answers that they
wow.
collected. So
Mm,
that happened in 2011. In 2013, I think we had like a lot of raining seasons,
yeah.
so some infrastructure was destroyed, and some of the interviewers uh, they weren't able to travel. Uh, they trapped in some parts of the country. And in 2015, when we tried to collect data using tablets
Mhm.
instead of paper, in some places they got assault, so they lost all the tablets.
Wow.
So I think that the main takeaway from all that kind of experiences is that in some moments and in some countries, it's really dangerous to collect data,
Yeah.
and we need to hire a vendor who really knows what kind of people they can hire as interviewers, and that they are going to be able to be trusty, to be wise about all the
Mhm.
decisions. And I think that a direct communication is it's important, because in every moment we knew what was happening because the vendor was really communicative with us.
Mm,
Also, since Guatemala people do not trust on strangers
yeah.
knocking your door and asking for strange questions, we issue letters backing the interviewers. We issue a letter um, with the name of the interviewer written on the letter, the documentation, the ID, and the time frame of the project.
Yeah.
So we provide, for example, our number, and it's like the kind of precautions that we need to take in order to be sure that people is going to be confident
Yeah.
about providing information. So I would say that first of all, communication,
Yeah.
and at the beginning we always check all the skip logic, all the new questions. We
Yeah.
always check them, and I think that it has been the way that we were able to reduce the errors, because we give to the vendor um, all the Excel with the new questions and with the new skip logic. So he puts all the questions in a program,
Mhm.
and after that he share with us the program, like the programmation of the interview, and I'm able to check all the skip logic in order to be sure that everything is working. So I think that so far that has been a good practice that have led us to this to reduce the mistakes about collecting data.
Yeah, well, those are some really incredible challenges that you mentioned, and something that not some teams might not be aware of that is a possibility. So that's something to keep in mind, because it makes sense that if someone's carrying around a tablet, they might it might get stolen. And of course there are natural disasters in most countries in the world that can disrupt the data collection process. And if you could maybe just quickly talk about, in the experiences where the data was lost, in the first instance where it was burned by the community, and the other one where the tablets were taken, stolen, how did you manage that? Did you just kind of recollect the data, or were you able to save any of the data somehow? What did you do in those situations?
Our vendor has a clarity about the minimum of observations that we need to collect from the entire country, and also from all the regions. Even though our survey is not representative for regions, but for the sampling process, it's important to have certain amount of observations from different regions in Guatemala, since he really knows the minimum of information that we need to collect. Every time that something happened, he just collect a new random sample in order to meet the minimum of observations.
Okay. So in those instances, the vendor kind of figured out, okay, if we've lost this amount, then I just need to collect, another random sample of this amount from those regions, and so it was just a new collection process in those cases.
Yes, and I think that something really helpful is that he's able to maintain the same cost structure. So he absorbs in certain way all the issues or unexpected issues that could happen, because sometimes what he needs to do is to pay for more time for the interviews in the field, or send a special team to collect additional data. So every time that he needs to do that, our cost structure remains the same. So maybe I know that he's always putting that in the budget, but at least every unexpected issue, he has been absorbing all the costs.
Wow. Well, that's something that teams should maybe factor into their decision as well. If something like that, something unexpected happens like that, who bears that cost? And it sounds like your vendor is quite willing to do that, which might be reflective of your long-term relationship, and you have that understanding. So that's something valuable to take into account. And Peter, I'll ask you now if you've had any problems with your vendors and how you manage that.
We really haven't had any serious problems. What we do a lot of is we have a lot of emails back and forth with the vendor, and just to try and head off any issues. But we haven't had any serious problems with the vendor. And so I really don't have anything to add on that front.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I mean, that's you don't have to have a problem with your vendor. That's great that you've had a positive experience. That speaks to your vendor, and their quality. And since we're kind of I was hoping to keep the call to about 45 minutes, which we're just up on now. And so if you could quickly get to this last question, I'll just start with you, Peter, since I have you. Shortly, if you could, if you had any advice for new teams or teams looking to switch vendors, if you had any advice on what you might have done differently or anything like quick that we haven't addressed here for those situations, you could speak to that.
I think the number one thing I would say is to try and find one individual in the company you can really build a relationship with and stick with that for a number of years. I think that would be my number one recommendation.
That's great. Yeah, that's not something I would have maybe thought before this call, that it's, you know, in situations where you're working, you know, every day with one vendor and one specific person who's managing the project, you know, that relationship's, you know, incredibly important, and it might trump the, you know, the company that they're at, which was your experience. So that's really interesting to hear. Elvira, maybe you could speak if you had any advice for teams, new teams, or returning teams, something you might have done differently or anything that you didn't address that you think is valuable.
Yes, I second what Peter said. Okay, we do have one person in the company that is working with us, and it's only with us. So that's important part. I will also maybe recommend some multi-year contracts, letting your vendor know that this is going to be a long-term relationship that could increase the commitment they can have. So, and then if it is the first time you're working with this vendor, explaining very carefully, taking time to explain the survey and making, doing all the, well, we do all the pilots, but that's a very important thing to do at the beginning. You need to invest time with this. And also talk to them if they're willing to participate in some new initiatives or pilots. We have done 2 in the past. We make a web panel pilot funded by GEM, and we also run a phone survey pilot, trying to see if we can move to phone service in order to save some money. That was important that the vendor was like very, in a very trust way, they told us that it was not a good thing to do in that moment. Okay, we were not ready as a country to move to phone because we don't have like a very good directories and things like that. But I even finally add that given all this situation with the coronavirus, maybe some countries, maybe including us, that were used to make face-to-face service, we will need to change. So we need to be very carefully in this change in the methodology so we can continue with good results, not having so much bias, and being very careful, especially for those teams that will need to change from face-to-face to some other web or phone methodology.
Yeah, so in your case, that flexibility, either in their willingness to do a new pilot project or to change their methodology kind of on the fly, is really important as well. You need to assess if that vendor can meet those kind of future challenges. That sounds very important as well, as something to take away from this. And David, if you could maybe speak if there's anything you wanted to say about you know, if you had any advice or anything that wasn't mentioned so far that you didn't get a chance to say for any teams that are looking into this.
Okay, I will say that I know that money is an issue, especially for funding a research project, but it shouldn't be the main reason to choose a vendor. Because sometimes if you pay a lot of money, or if you pay low, you're going to have maybe a poor quality. So I would say that reputation is like really important.
Mhm.
So you should ask colleagues or other institutions who had previous experience collecting data, asking for references, and after that, try to have like a meeting with the candidates,
Mm.
trying to know how many projects they are running in a year, because you want to be the priority. So
Yeah,
try
right.
to be sure about during the time pipeline what the vendor is going to do from May to July, and be sure that you have like importance in the pipeline.
Right.
Second, I will say that be really open, having the know that the vendor is always going to be open, that you can go every time to, for example, for the training sessions, for the pilots processes, and even for the field work, you always can go. It's not that you're going to go everywhere, but you at least have the information where they are collecting data, what are they doing, because I think that gives you some sense of control in order to be sure that everything is going as it should be. And at the end, I think that at the last point, communication, having a good communication,
Mhm.
it's important, and asking data in advance, it's important as well, because you can stop and be sure that some mistakes are going to be corrected, are going to be amended.
Yeah. So that's a lot of good advice right there. I think the one thing that a couple of things I wanted to spotlight is that the money not being the, it's obviously a big concern, but it can't be the only concern, because I think teams should be seeing it as an investment. And if you can't guarantee that the quality is good because you didn't spend enough money on the vendor, then you probably won't get funding in the future, because that the potential funders won't see your data as trustworthy. So that's something to keep in mind, thinking of the longer term. And then asking about making sure that you're priority when the data collection is happening. And that's essential to data quality as well, because that's, if you get kind of put on the back burner, or if you're not made the priority, and you don't collect data during certain times, that can impact the data quality as well. So and Anastasia, since you joined, I'll allow you to ask a question if you have any, and if not, that's okay as well. Do you have any questions for the panel here? Perhaps you can ask it in the group chat, or unmute and ask this way.
Right. Thank you very much for all your very interesting insights. Actually, I very much appreciated about all the story you about the importance of long-term and reliable relationships with the vendor. And I very much enjoyed Peter's intervention about how it's important to build a long-lasting relationship with one reliable person inside of vendor company. But my question was, what if it happens, well, life happens, and if, for example, this project manager, which is very reliable, is ill, or he leaves the company, the vendor, and finally all the communication process built carefully and which was very smooth for the years is kind of disrupted. I think it was the experience we, the UK team had last year, when the project manager, which was very reliable, had health issues, and the other team in BMG wasn't really as much informed, as much professional, as much responsive. So we had the delays because of this. So how would you deal with this?
I guess we'll leave it open to anyone who wants to respond to that. If someone who you have a trusted relationship leaves the company, how would you deal with that?
It would be a disaster.
That's an honest answer.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful? And I don't know if this was your experience, Anastasia, if you maybe making sure that the company is tracking everything that you're doing, so that if there is a handoff situation, it won't be so catastrophic. Was that in your experience, Anastasia? Did it seem like doesn't seem like there was a smooth handoff or transition to the new person? Is that correct?
Yes, I think so. Well, unfortunately, I'm new to the team, so I only overheard the problems ongoing. But I think it's something we should consider also, because it's very good to have very good relationship with one person. But sometimes we don't think that it will happen. So it's probably to keep in mind of that. Well, it's one of the risks potentially.
And David, okay, yeah. Go ahead,
I
Olivia.
comment something that,
Yeah.
yes, we do have on this researcher person that we work with them, with she actually, very, very closely. And then also we have a regional manager from the firm, which is in contact with us. So he is pretty much informed about what's happening. So in this awful situation, we will need to be able to have one new person responsible from the project, and then start again the relationship. We just need to move forward and start again.
And that's just how it has to be sometimes. It sounds like, yeah. And David, did you have something to say? Yep.
Yes, I just wanted to add that it could happen in both ways. For example, we could have a key researcher in our team that suddenly leaves or is not able to participate in the project. So I think that that's kind of a risk that we need to manage and minimize. And I think that good practices could start by documenting all the activities, trying to develop some kind of manuals in order to make easier or flatter the learning curve. Because at the end, the majority of knowledge, it's on people. So
Yeah.
people are going to live, are going to, I don't know, die, but it's a bad example in these times of coronavirus. But
Right.
at the end, the knowledge should stay in the institution. So we need to start developing some tools in order to collect all the knowledge before we have this kind of movements of human capital outside our own organization or outside our vendors.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That it's, it can be both. It's important to document everything you do on both ends, because it might not be the vendor who's suddenly making a quick transition, but the GEM team, that if someone leaves who has all this institutional knowledge and it's not conveyed, it can be frustrating for the vendor as well. So we're up on an hour here, and we want to keep it, pretty short, relatively short, so teams who watch this later don't have to, sit too long. And we appreciate everyone who participated. Thank you, Elvira, David, and Peter, for attending and sharing your knowledge. I'm going to put together some notes and send it to you, and so you can kind of look it over and make sure I didn't miss anything, and then we can send that out to teams with the link to the recorded session. So thanks again, and good luck, and stay safe. And have a good day.
Home?
Yes, I'm home.
Thank you, Forrest.
Yes, and everyone have a good day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
You too.
Bye.
Bye.